Welcome to Success Factors from a different angle. My name is Pablo Estuardo. Happen to be here in New York City this week, and it's a very interesting topic I wanted to cover today, which is about managed pending hires. I'm actually walking, it's very windy by the way, walking in Times Square, and I see a bunch of people going in and out, right? So it made me think of managed pending hires. Just like in Success Factors, probably the place in which you see the most flow of employees. So I figure I'll give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to optimize the screen of managed pending hires. Now, before I do that, there are two things I wanted to get out of the way as always. Number one, anything and everything that I said today is my own and does not represent the views or opinion of my current employer. Number two, as you can see, this is really informal. It's typically always me just sharing my thoughts in front of the cell phone here, just like if I was talking to you at a coffee shop somewhere around the world, and this time in New York City. Okay, managed pending hire. First of all, managed pending hires, the activity of processing people there, it's very important, right? Because it's sort of like the gate to your HRIS. And of course, by the way, assuming that you have recruiting and onboarding running, otherwise you don't use that screen. That's a topic for another day. But you want to process people in managed pending hires as soon as possible. And the reason for that is that is the event that allows you to create the user ID in the system. User ID is really important, right? Because, you know, most likely you're using that data to feed it onto downstream systems. And in the context of onboarding, you want to get that done sooner rather than later, right? So you can process or you can get whatever they need. So let's say you're provisioning a laptop, you want to get that happen sooner rather than later. Now, what is the problem with managed pending hire? It's a very rich screen, which means that you're gonna have a ton of information, a lot of information coming from either recruiting or onboarding. The other one is going to be more Employee Central related, and in many cases, you're gonna have a bunch of business rules, right, that propagates information. So what are some of the tips and tricks, right, for you to optimize the whole process? Number one, at a bare minimum, all your required fields should be pre-populated somehow, right? And I'm gonna assume here people have onboarding, okay? You might not have onboarding, which means that a lot of the data which you typically collect in onboarding, you just don't have access to it, right? So I'm gonna focus here on people who do have onboarding. So, at a minimum, anything that is required, let's say national ID, you should have a field in onboarding that you're requiring that data. Of course, only where it makes sense. That's number one, right? So consider all, anything that, again, at a bare minimum is required. Number two, of course, leverage as many business rules as you can, but that's more part of Employee Central anyway, so I'm sure you're already doing that. Let me see my notes here. And so number three, pay attention, right, to the data types. I've seen it too often in which you will have a field in Employee Central of, a pick list, but then in onboarding you're collecting it as a free text field, which of course then you can't integrate, so it's going to be a problem. Make sure you pay attention to your data types. And of course, before rolling out onboarding, because at the time, by the time that you have people going through, you need to switch data types, it's already too late. You can't use that information anymore. And same with pick lists, right? It's not just enough to have the same pick list, but some pick lists are kind of tricky. So, for example, currency. Currency in Employee Central is not really a pick list, it's just a list based on an object. In onboarding, you don't have that architecture, so you have to leverage a pick list, which means that at a minimum, right, your external codes or your labels need to match. And depending on the field that you're playing with, you might actually have some limitations. So I always suggest, at a minimum, as part of an implementation, to pay attention to that and ensure that every field is actually coming up and test it not just with one value, but test it with several values, right? Because there could be differences there. But then too, if it's a true pick list, you probably want to use same pick list that Employee Central is using, and if for whatever reason you can't, of course make sure that the external codes match, the label match. and of course test it, fully test it, because I've seen always problems with that, and also the relationship between some standard fields versus custom fields. Sometimes standard ones behave in a different way. For example, emergency contact, right? You have to use repeating fields in onboarding, otherwise it's not going to work, right? Or the second or third option is not going to work. So again, you got to be able to recognize and play around with that and fully test it. And then also, in efforts to optimize it, when you're looking at information like national ID or postal code, take advantage of the validation, which of course should match both systems, right? Employee Central and onboarding. Because I've seen it too many times in which, let's say, address is required, therefore, for many countries, postal code is required. You collected it in onboarding, but the format might be different, right? You might be missing a dash, you might be missing a space, right? Some of them are actually, case sensitive, right? So if you can identify the validator in Employee Central, you can make sure that you have the same validator in onboarding. That way the data is running smooth, right? And the last thing I'll say around this topic, the whole intention of it, right, is almost like the gate to your system, right? And it kind of, functionally speaking, you want people to kind of take a one last look before hiring, if you will, the person into the system, just to make sure that the information is correct. At the same time, to be honest, especially for organizations that have very high volume of hires, it's cumbersome. So if you are able to get at a place in which you can have at a minimum all your required fields completely being populated either by business rules or by information coming from onboarding, you can automate that, right? And some of the things that I've done with clients in the past is writing an RPA-based bot that runs, however frequent you wanted it to run, and it goes to the screen and clicks continue 4 times, and it processes your people without the need of anybody going in, unless it's a problem and it sends you a report or an email so someone can take a look at it. So that's my challenge to you. Why don't you look at your managed pending hire configuration, see can it be optimized or not, how much time your people ops teams are spending looking at that screen, entering data, changing data, and then I challenge you to completely automate that process. There's no reason you need to spend people's hours handling that process once you can take full advantage of digital workers like an RPA bot. So with that, I invite you to, if you have more tips and tricks related to managed pending hire, I invite you to post them here on the comment section so we can start a discussion. If you got anything out of the video, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, tell all your friends about it, and I'll see you next time.